Hello Internet. Today we're going to be working on a new project. Specifically, we're going to be working on a universal Windows platform app. The app I'm calling Emotible, and the idea is it's going to be a clipboard for various text character things that you want to paste. So if you've ever seen the classic like table flip emoticon and things like that, this is going to be an app where you can go to click once and you'll get it copied to your clipboard and you can use it anywhere in any app you need. And since it's a universal Windows platform app, it's going to run everywhere. It's going to run on your Xbox, it's going to run on your phone, it's going to run on your tablets, as long as they run Windows, and it's going to run on your desktop PCs. So that's sort of the idea here. So where I'm at right now is nowhere. I've created a totally empty, blank, universal Windows platform app. There's nothing here. This is the default template you get when you create an app. I haven't done anything with it. The only thing I've done is I've clicked this button. That's all I've done. So the idea here is my computer wants me to restart. Nope. Go away. Okay. Turn those off. Okay. Sorry about that. So the idea here is this app is going to be, we're going to develop it in parts. Some of it is going to be stuff that I've done before. I've made multiple apps before for Windows phones and Windows platform and things like that. So I've done this stuff before, but there's also a lot of new stuff coming on. We can target the Xbox, which I've never done before. I also don't have an Xbox. That may be a little bit difficult, but we're gonna see where that goes. We also have some things like the new composition API, which was introduced with the anniversary update 3 months ago, back in July. So we're going to play with that too. Probably not in this episode, actually definitely not in this episode, but we're going to get there. So the idea is we need an app. We need buttons and we need a clipboard. The clipboard is already there, and our app looks like this. Super cool, right? So this extra stuff up here, this is debugging information. Not entirely sure what it is. I believe this is going to be frames per second since it's not changing. I don't think it's rendering anything. And this is a really fancy thing that they added in Windows 10, and it allows you to look at and inspect your UI elements in your UI. We don't have any, except a grid. So, but this will allow us to actually, if we're having weird UI issues, we can actually visually debug all the controls in our thing and see where they are, what they're doing, things like that. Cool. So we can close this, and that should stop. On the right there, you saw it automatically launches a profiler. That's what that graph was. It was graphing the memory usage of the application. So ideally, we want that to stay flat after we start the application. It should build everything up and then it should just stay there. If it keeps going up, we've got memory leaks or we're using way more memory than we need to. Going through some of the things that are here, we have our app.xaml and our app.xaml.cs. If you've never used C# before or are new to WPF, Silverlight, UWP, things like that, there's what's called a partial class. This application is one of them, the app. This main page is another one. And so what this does is there is an app.xaml, and this defines some qualities about our application. This one is defining, for example, what the requested theme is. And none of this other stuff is really used. This kind of defines some namespaces that we can use if we add more controls. Usually you'll see like other resources defined here, things like that. And then this class is connecting directly to this guy. So this namespace, emotible.app, lines up with the one here. And so what happens is when you compile, this app.xaml gets compiled into another partial class of our app class, and then those kind of get combined in behind the scenes. And so that's what a partial class is. is instead of generating code into the same class file, it generates two separate files and the compiler figures it out afterwards. So you'll see that a lot with UI stuff, especially on like the main page, which we'll get to next. But you'll see there's a lot more stuff going on here. We've got UI controls and stuff, and that can handle initializing our UI. But going back to the app, what happens here is pretty much, it's what's running our app. So everything else that happens in this class, but this is more or less a wrapper around everything. We really aren't going to touch this much except when we launch and need to load things, or when we close and need to save things. And so what this has is a bunch of callbacks, on launched, and there should be one for navigation failed, and on suspending. And so what happens in each of these is these are called if I close the app or if it gets tombstoned. I don't know if tombstoning is a thing in Universal Windows Platform. Pretty sure it still exists. I don't know if it's called that anymore. That's a Windows Phone 7 thing. But so on suspending will happen when it's closed, and then on launch will happen when it's resumed or when it's opened for the first time, things like that. And we get a bunch of extra code here that handles, this one is resuming from suspended state, and pretty much all this does is it's going to spin up a frame, and then it's going to stick our main class into it. So that this is what is telling our application to go and load up this main page. So if I go, okay, that doesn't work. Oh well. But if I go back to our main page, it looks super simple, and it is super simple. And we probably aren't going to actually touch this. We're probably going to use a lot of the magic of the Universal Windows Platform and WPF and those kind of things. XAML gives you a lot of tools to make develop your life way easier than it would be in some of the other platforms. So all this is doing is it's initializing our component, which is going to build the actual UI out of what's configured here. So that initialized component is going to run through all of this, build it up, and then it will display it. And so all we're getting right now is we're getting a grid, which is just going to be empty. The background of that grid is going to be a theme resource that is going to be the application page background theme brush. So walking through that super quick, the theme, there's a few different resources, and these are like define things. You can define your own resources. There's 3 if I remember. There's the theme resource, the static resource, and the nope, I think that's it. Yeah. So theme resource is going to be reloaded every single time. I don't know if it's every single time you launch the application or if it's every time the theme changes. But so since we have this theme resource here, if we ever change our theme, the default is hard-coded in to have a specific light background. So this will never change. But if we have it set so it's user preference, this theme resource is what's going to handle figuring that out. It's actually going to switch the style for us. Stuttering. So yeah, there's that. What else was I going to cover? I think that's it. So I think we can get right into it. So we've got our main page, our app, and our project, which is going to define, this is new to me. I haven't really done much with the Universal Windows Platform. I've tinkered with it, but coming from a Windows Phone background, the Windows Phone platform has been kind of, I don't know, it's kind of been barren, I guess is the word for it. There hasn't really been much going on there. And so that's kind of been discouraging as a developer for the platform. It's been hard to want to go and make things for it, especially with how fast the UI or this has been changing late in the past. It's been very hard to keep up with everything. Right, so I think what we're going to do for this video is we're going to jump into our main page, and we're going to create a super simple UI. This isn't going to be the final UI by any means, but what we're going to try to do here is we're going to try to get something so that we can make sure everything works. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to make a list that's going to have buttons that you can click and that will receive the event when you click them. And I think that's all we'll do for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a items control. And so an items control is just going to display all the items in our list, and that will just be that. There's no anything happening here, but that's fine. We can get to that later. I'm going to create a new folder and call it our view models. So XAML gives you this really powerful tool, data binding. And so what this allows you to do is it allows you to bind your objects to your UI elements. And then when you update your code, it automatically updates the UI elements with them. And you can have this, you can define this in a whole bunch of ways. You can have it do all sorts of cool stuff. You can have one-way bindings, things like that. You can make it as complicated as you need, which is really awesome because you can do cool stuff with this. We're not gonna probably get into too much of it, but it's still pretty sweet. And if you have time, definitely check it out. So what I'm going to create is I'm going to create a emote list view model. And so this is just going to be a container for all of our lists. And so what we're going to have in here is we're going to have an observable collection. And so the difference between an observable collection and a normal list is an observable collection actually fires off the events you need to see updates in your UI. So this, unlike a normal list, this is going to fire events that we need to tie everything together. There's specific events that are required. And the normal UI, or the normal list and linked list, don't have that. It's going to be, we're not going to do anything with that yet, so I'll just make it a list of objects, because why not? And we're going to call it our emotes list. And I'm not going to use underscores because that's gross. And then we can initialize this just like that. Make it all uniform. And then all we need is a getter and a setter. So we'll create an observable collection of objects called our emotes list. And this will get okay, that didn't work as I had planned. Get our emotes list, and it will return, or it will set. I hate when it does that. It's auto formatting on me, and I don't really appreciate it. Emotes list. No, that will infinite loop. Emotes list equals the value. What is going on? Why is it automatically capitalizing? Please stop. Okay. ReSharper is going a little bit crazy on me. I'm not crazy, am I? Does not exist in the current context. Oh, you're right. Fixed it. Okay. So don't add S's onto the end of things. That breaks things. So this is all we need for now. This doesn't actually work 100%, but we'll get to that later. I'm not actually going to fix that because we'll actually get to see why this breaks, and then we can walk through it then. But all this is doing is we have our getter and our setter for this, and it's going to allow us to set this observable collection. The important part is this getter, because it's going to let us get our observable collection and actually modify it. Actually, now that I think about this, it's probably best if we don't even have a setter. I don't think you need it because it's initialized here, and then we can just add onto it and return it. And then if we ever need it empty, we can just clear. I think that's the best way to do it. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so we have our emotes list. Now, what we need to do is two things. First, we need to actually get things into this list, and I can do that very simply. We won't do this for long, but I'm going to do it for now. And I'm going to initialize it, take this out for now, and then I'm just going to stick some random stuff in here. Add, we want to add something. We can add hello and world because I'm super original. So what this now, after this is constructed, we have two elements in our list. So theoretically, what we can do now is go into here and bind this list we just created onto this items control. So to do that, we first need to go into here and add the namespace. I usually call it view models to our path thing. Not super familiar with the names in XML. Not super familiar with names in general, but we want view models. Okay, and so what this does is it exposes the types in there to our XML. So we can see that we'll see them here and we'll actually be able to reference them. The important thing with that is that we can now go page and add some resources. And I want a view models emote view model. And we will call it xkey emotes. And we'll give it a name that's the same. So the name is what it's actually going to be called. These both have to be unique, but the name, we were talking about how partial classes were pulled together. This name is what it's actually given in the generated code, which means you can reference that name from here. Not that you should really ever do that, but you can do that with the name. The key is exposed in here. And that's how we're going to actually reference that in our items control. So just covering why you shouldn't use this name too often is it tends to, when you start doing that, you start getting away from this data binding idea in general. And so when that happens, you start merging your UI with all of your logic that's behind it. And it makes it really hard to modify things when your user interface and your logic are all tied together. It's one of the reasons like jQuery, people don't like jQuery because of it forces this paradigm. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get away from that. This is just something I do, so if I ever need to, it's the same. So what we need to do next is tie our items control to that new view model we just created. And we do that by setting its item source. And this item source needs to be bound to a list. And that list is where it's going to pull the elements from. So what it will do is it will iterate and create a new element in this items control, following a template that we haven't defined yet. And it will insert each of them for each element in this list. And for each of those templates, it will bind that element to that template. So we can actually reference those values. So how this works is we want a static resource named emotes. So this will reference this. And what we actually want is we don't want just emotes. We want the emotes list. And so there's a few ways to do this. we can do the item source equals this. I'm going to actually set that equal to the emotes list and do data context and bind that to our emotes. And I'll change this to a binding. So that was a lot that I did really fast. But what this was doing is this data context is what is bound to this list. So this list is showing data for this emotes list, and we want to list all the items that are bound to this emotes list. So this binding is what we were talking about before. This keyword bound to a value allows us to display things. So we've got that. It should work. One of the things you'll notice is we've totally lost our UI view. It's totally gone. It's kind of an annoying thing, but we actually have to build the project to get it back. It's because this doesn't know it exists because it's looking at the binary files. I assume that's what's happening. It looks at the binary files and it doesn't find it because it hasn't built yet. So this emotes list view model exists in our code, but it doesn't exist in the binaries yet until we build it. So that's why that's like that. So going back to here, in our items control, it's got a bunch of properties under here. What we want is we want our item template. And so this is going to define the template that each item in our list, in our items control, is going to use. So we want to give it a data template, which is going to, I believe that's what handles the data bindings. I'm not entirely sure why this is required. I didn't honestly look into that much. I just know it is required. If you skip it, everything's not going to work. So data template. Then what we can do is we can just bind things to this. So I'm going to go super simple. I'm just going to bind a button and take the content and just give it a standard binding. So this is a special case. I think it's special. I don't know. It's probably just a bad practice, but it's useful in this case because I just need to do this quick. And then we can move on to making it actual data that we're binding to. But what this is going to do is it's going to bind to the data. So since both of those things were strings, this is actually going to bind to those strings, and the content of this button, which is going to be the text the button displays, should be, if I did everything right, it should be hello, and then there should be one below it called world. So assuming all of this is right, well, we can find out. So let's run it locally. It's gonna run through a bunch of stuff, pull this up, and we should see two buttons. It's kind of hard to see because they are covered up. We can fix that quick, but you can see there's two buttons showing up here, and it's doing what we need, which is fantastic. And you can see now that we've built, our preview comes back, which is handy. But you can see we've got hello and world in two buttons. There's a lot wrong with this. One, the buttons aren't sized anywhere near correctly. Two, they're way up in the top left corner. And three, they don't actually do anything. So we're going to fix all three of those. And I think that'll be it. Because we're kind of running long on time, or we will be after I finish those. So first things, we need to increase the size of our buttons. So the way you do that is there is a bunch of properties on here. There is horizontal alignment, there is vertical alignment, there is the width, the max width, and the min width, and then there is the height, max height, and min height. So the max and min values of both the height and width are going to define how big an item can get and how small an item can get. So if you have it dynamically scaling, but you only want it to get so big or so small, those let you set that. And then your vertical alignments allow you to align the thing relative to whatever it's inside. So since we're in a vertical list of our items control, we can't really do a vertical alignment. That doesn't really make sense because there is no, it's in a content that block that is as tall as it already is. So aligning it anywhere else isn't going to change anything. But if we change the horizontal alignment to stretch, it should stretch across. Now, I don't think this will actually work. I'm going to just run it just to see if it works. But there are some things that happen. Okay, it did work. I was thinking something else would happen with, there's a thing with stack panels that can cause it not to. But that we didn't appear to hit that, so that's good. But you can see our buttons are now stretched across our screen. Cool. So next, let's center everything. So obviously we can't center the buttons individually. That doesn't really make any sense. It would just center them in that little space they're in, which shouldn't change anything. But what we can do is we can actually center this items control. So I'm not sure I actually like that. Let's just give it a margin of 12. And so this will just put 12 pixels around the sides of any of this. And I believe, if I recall correctly, these are device pixel. These are not device pixels. What is the wording they use? So they're not technically actual pixels, is if I remember correctly. These are scaled pixels. So if you're familiar with WPF, you know that it supports the Windows scaling stuff. This is similar to that. It supports high DPI screens, like a phone screen. My phone is 5 inches wide, and it's got a higher resolution than my desktop screens. So obviously with that, if you draw things at the same pixel size, nobody's going to be able to tell what's on your phone. So this kind of helps adjust for that. Anyway, kind of went off on a tangent there. But this should lower things down a bit. And we can run it quick just to show. Nice thing is it builds super quick. Almost takes longer to start than it does to go. But anyway, we've got this, and you can see it's kind of got a border around it, which is fine. That's what we need. So the final thing we want to do is we want to receive events when this happens. And so to do that, I'm actually going to create two things. I am going to create a new view model that is going to store our emote. So we're going to stick this in here, and I'm going to give it a public string. I'll just call it content so it lines up. And then we're going to give it a public I command called something on click. And so an I command is a function from WPF. What this allows you to do is the I command is going to get your it's effectively something your buttons can call. It's an action you can perform, and we'll have to define this. I command is an interface that almost any class that starts with I in C# is going to be an interface. That's just the standard they use. So we've got this. There's still no data binding. There's still no callbacks going on. And this is going to get us into trouble probably. Actually, nah, this will probably be fine. But I'm going to make that public because it should be. And this guy, public, because it should be. Yeah, I think that's everything we need. We've got our emote and our emote list. This guy needs to not be a list of objects, but a list of emote view models. And so what we're doing now is we're binding, or we're adding these emote view models as the object of this. And that's going to break this guy. So what we need to do down here is create a new one. You can use the fun constructor. We'll give it a content of hello, and we won't give it a command for now. And we'll give it a new emote view model of world. So when we run this, the idea is nothing should change. It should look exactly like it did the last time we ran it. That's the goal. We'll see if that actually happens or not, but that's where we're trying to get to. So we've got this. We need to change our data bindings now because we're binding to just the object, and the object is no longer what we want. We want to bind to the content of that object. So we're binding to our emote list, getting an item in there. So how that's working is we're binding to this, and then each item is going to want one of these guys, and then we're binding this content onto the content of the button. That's how that flow is working. Then I think that's it. We should just be able to run this and it should work. It should look identical to what we had. And it does. I'm going to close that. That would be smart. So we have hello world. Cool. It works. But now what we want is we want a command. We want something that actually does something. So I'm going to make a new folder, call it commands. I'm not going to split this up because this is just going to be to kind of get things started. Copy text command. And what this guy is going to do is inherit that fun new interface, the I command. Oops, is that not? Oh, it took away my extra fun stuff. My hotkeys weren't working. Anyway, this is now the interface implemented. So there's three things here. There's can execute changed, which is this event, which is going to fire off every time the ability of the command to execute changes. We have to handle that ourselves. But it's also, this is kind of used, well, we'll jump back up here to can execute, which we're just going to return true here, but you'd edit this to say, can your command be run? If the answer is yes, then you should return true, like I'm doing. If it's false or can change, then you should you make use of both this event and this to kind of handle that. And the buttons are smart enough that they can actually disable themselves based on this. So just by implementing this command correctly, you can disable and enable your button without having to implement custom logic or anything like that. Then this execute, I'm not going to do anything here because the idea is we just want to see it work. Yeah, there's no console. So I'm just going to drop a, no, we're not going to just drop a breakpoint. We're going to do float 10, no, float pi equals 3.14f. Cool. That's very helpful of me. Oh, it's been a long day. I was clicking in the wrong place. Anyway, we've got our breakpoint here. And so if we set this up correctly, we should hit our breakpoint when we click our button. If this is getting executed, we should hit this, and then we'll know it works. So we've got that. What we need to do now is actually attach that. So I'm going to onClick equals a new copy text command. Copy text command. Cool. So both of these are now bound to this. And then we just need to hook that up in our UI layer. And that's really easy to do. You just do command equals binding, binding on click. And that's all we have to do. The other thing we can do is we can actually send a parameter to this copy text command. And I'm actually going to do that just so we see who called it. I'm going to send the content over. So if we click the button that says hello, we should see hello. If we click the button that says world, we should see world as this parameter. And that's just a handy way to do that. Right. So that should be everything we need. So let's just start this. And we can click hello, and our command gets executed. We get hello there. And pi isn't set because we haven't executed that code yet. Cool. So that's working. And we jump back here, click world, and now we get world. And so that's the basics of Universal Windows Platform app. Super basics. We're going to be getting into more and more complex stuff, but I thought I'd start this off slow, kind of try to get people to the same page, because this can get confusing pretty quick. We're going to have a lot of layers talking to a lot of different things. And so getting the basics down is where I kind of wanted to start. So hopefully this was interesting. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, give it a like down below. Leave a comment. Let me know where you want this to go. And yeah, thanks for watching. See you, Internet.